Welcome everyone to our webinar hosted by Caring.com. We have Mark Dunning joining us today from Care Planning Institute to help demystify VA home care aid programs. We will be honing in on 3 programs that we think all home care agencies should be familiar with when assisting current and potential clients who are veterans. Mark truly has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to these VA programs, and so we are very excited to have him here today. Now, as we begin, I would like to walk through a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. First off, this is a one-way webcast, meaning that only the presenters, Mark and myself, will have video and audio throughout today's presentations. However, we would still love to hear from you. We will be having a live Q&A section after our content, and so please submit your questions through the Q&A portion within Zoom at any point throughout today's presentation, and we will be answering those questions after the presentation. And one question that we always receive during that section is, will this webinar be recorded? And the answer is yes. We are recording today, and we will share out both the recording as well as the slides following the presentation. You can also find our entire webinar archive at partners.caring.com. Now, this free webinar is brought to you by Caring.com. And if anyone joining is not familiar already with Caring, Caring has a portfolio of websites and referral services that millions of people use to research senior living and senior care. Our mission is to help as many seniors and their caregivers as possible through empathetic, expert guidance as they search for care services. And thousands of senior living communities and home care agencies partner with Caring to reach their target audience who is actively looking online for care solutions. Now, one of the many reasons that care seekers turn to Caring is for our high integrity reviews program, where we have over 350,000 consumer reviews. Now, my name is Olivia Duke, and I'm the B2B Marketing Director here at Caring, and I will be serving as the moderator for today's presentation. More importantly, I'm excited to introduce our expert presenter for today, Mark Dunning. Mark has over 2 decades of experience in the home care industry and is a certified senior care manager. He works with Care Planning Institute and has immense experience when it comes to working with government programs such as the VA to help seniors access more funding for care. So Mark, would you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and Care Planning Institute?
Sure. Thank you, Olivia. And thanks everyone for joining today. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Hope your week is going well. Basically, Care Planning Institute has been around for a number of years, the goal of which is to help essentially seniors and their families navigate finding funding to pay for their care. And that's really one of kind of our biggest goals here at Care Planning Institute, is to help people find that funding. And the funding source that we're going to be discussing today, of course, is working with the Veterans Administration and some programs that they offer that are often misunderstood, even by VA employees. We often have VA employees contacting us to get clarification on certain programs. So if you're not sure about these programs or never heard of them, don't feel bad, because even some people at the VA feel like they're in your shoes too. So,
well, great. So, I mean, not great to hear, but great that we're tapping into this information that seems to be so confusing to so many people. As mentioned earlier, today's session will dive into 3 specific VA benefit programs that all home care agencies should be familiar with. And each of these programs goes by acronyms that you may have heard mentioned before. We'll start with A, or the Aide and Attendance Pension Benefit. Then Mark will discuss the PCAFC, or the Program for Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers. And finally, Mark will cover the VDC, or Veterans Directed Care Program. So after this presentation, we're hoping that not only will you recognize these acronyms that may pop up in conversation, but we're hoping that you'll know enough to join in and contribute to those conversations and help advocate for veterans and helping them get the support they deserve. And don't forget, we will be answering questions live following the content portion. So please submit questions at any point within the Q&A section within Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer those. So without further ado, I will now hand it over to Mark to help demystify these VA home care aid programs.
Great, thanks, Olivia. And just to echo what Olivia said, my goal with you guys today is just to help you learn a little bit more about these acronyms and these programs so that when you meet a veteran, you can actually have an intelligent conversation with them about the options that are out there. They're not going to throw an acronym like PCAFC at you and ask you, what's the deal with that program? And you kind of get a blank 1,000-yard stare on your face, right? You will actually know what that acronym means and the basics of that program and be able to have an intelligent conversation with them about the pros and cons of that program. So with that being said, these three programs are designed to help veterans, okay? And also one of them is designed to help spouses of veterans as well, with their activities of daily living, okay? Bathing, dressing, grooming, etc. Okay, so that's the basic goal, and to help them in their chosen place of residence, which is typically at their home. Some of these do allow it to be in independent living as well, and we'll talk about that. And then others allow in assisted living as well. So we'll get into the details on those. So again, just a quick summary, the three programs we're going to be focusing on today are the Aide and Attendance Pension Benefit, which many of you may have heard about or even be working with some of your veteran clients or spouses of veterans. And then we're going to jump into the PCAFC program and then the VDC program. Okay, so let's jump into Aide and Attendance. I often get home care agencies calling us and asking about our home care Aide and Attendance program that we have here to help veterans with this, get access to this benefit or their spouses. The basic requirements are that it does require benefit application. For those of you who have seen those requirements of the application, they are quite daunting to look at all that paperwork and have to submit everything and make sure it's done right, or it tends to end up in a black hole with the VA and go from one desk to another, it seems, up to, we've heard of situations, taking 10 years, right? And the veteran actually passing away before a decision is finally made. This program does have income and asset limits. I think that's one of the biggest limitations of this program is the income and asset limits. But, as I always say, if you're sitting in someone's home and they don't meet the income and asset limits of this program and they do need care, you're in a place now where someone needs care and they've got money to pay for it, right? So not a bad place to be. This program is for those of lower income and lower assets, but not as low as the requirements are for Medicaid, okay? So just some of the specifics here, veterans over age 65 and their spouses can qualify for $1,300 to $2,600 a month. Wartime services required. They need to have served during an approved time of war. The ones that we're seeing right now are Korean War and Vietnam era. All our World War II vets have basically kind of passed on. And so it's mainly Korean War and Vietnam War vets that we're seeing. Eventually it will be the Gulf War vets, right? One caveat that is worth mentioning is that, and some people ask about this, that's why I kind of put this in there, is it can disrupt Medicaid benefits, depending on who that Medicaid social worker is that is managing the Medicaid benefits for that particular veteran or spouse of veteran. They might consider this income because this money goes directly to the veteran or spouse of the veteran's bank account once they get approved, okay? So this is funds that will go to their account, and a Medicaid social worker could consider that income, right? They could say, well, you're getting this money, and we could tell them until we're blue in the face that, well, it's all getting spent on care. It's a wash, you can see this, that, and the other. We can even set up a separate bank account just for this benefit. And look, it's all a wash. There's a zero at the end of every month here. But depending on the social worker, some of them may still consider that income and want to bounce them out of Medicaid programs. So just something to keep in mind. The VA is totally fine with someone having Medicaid. It's just Medicaid sometimes is not okay with someone having this VA benefit, okay? What I recommend is just getting with the client and having them talk to their VA social worker about this VA benefit and making sure ahead of time that that is going to be okay. Getting something in writing is always the best idea, right? That way, if that particular social worker rolls off and a new one rolls in, you've got a written letter saying, look, I was already authorized to have this program by your former person, co-worker there. The other downside of aid and attendance benefit is that you cannot have what we call VA disability and aid and attendance. Anyone who was wounded during a time of war will typically have what we call a VA disability rating. Okay, and those ratings go from 10 to 100%, depending on what level of disability they now have due to that injury that they received. These injuries don't necessarily have to be prevalent during the time of war. They could have come more prevalent later in life. Agent Orange is one of those. That's a Vietnam War era chemical that was used to basically destroy forests and forestation areas. And that chemical can do, harmful things to your lungs, basically. And so some people may have a VA disability rating after coming home many years later because of something they suffered or went through during that period of war and service. Most people these days won't want to give up that VA disability. So if you find someone who has a VA disability rating already, they're usually not interested in giving that up, only because this benefit, you kind of have to see it as a reimbursement benefit. I'd say 99% of the time, they've got to be spending money on care, okay, to basically discount their income in order to qualify for this benefit, okay? It's kind of like one of those things where you spend money on care and then the VA reimburses you that money. That's a kind of a simplified way of looking at it. The thing about VA disability is that you don't need to spend that money on care. You can go to the casino, you can do whatever you want with that money, and you will still get that money coming to your bank account from the VA. Not so with aid and attendance. If you get approved because you're spending X amount of dollars on care, you will unapprove yourself or fall out of eligibility if you don't continue to obviously spend that money on care ongoing, 99% of the time, okay? There are instances where their income is already very low and they could qualify for some amounts of that benefit, maybe a few $100s without spending money on care. That can happen depending on how low their income is, but that's usually the super low income people that could maybe qualify without spending money on care. And it's usually maybe $200 or $300 a month versus the entire benefit amount of $1,300 to $2,600. So usually when people apply for this benefit is because they want care, they need care, and they're planning on spending money on care, right? And then they can qualify for this benefit because they're spending money on care. So usually if people have a VA disability rating, especially if it's over 50%, they're getting a sizable amount of money every month and they're not going to be willing to give that up. Usually because they can spend it on whatever they want, and B, they fought very hard to get that money approved. Some spend, 5+ years doing that, so they're not going to give that up. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're talking to people. Most people use what we call a VA accredited agent or attorney to assist them with a benefit application like this. Many of you may be using some accredited agent or attorney or some other company that helps with these types of applications. Some of these people will charge, statistically out there, $1,300 to $5,000 for a one-time application that they will do for them. Technically, you can't charge people to file a VA benefit application, so they kind of get around that through saying it's a cash analysis fee and this type of thing in order to kind of skirt around that. But anyway, usually they will end up paying that kind of money. If it's an attorney, they might be willing to do a will or a trust in lieu of helping them file for this application. But usually there's some money involved to get the help they're looking for from these folks. We do have a program as well in-house here. We don't charge for that program. The home care providers we work with pay a little bit out of their net profit, And so that's how we get around charging the clients for the assistance with this program. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's aid and attendance. I think of all the three programs I'm talking about here, that one is the most applicable to you guys. I know I focused on a lot of the cannot do's in that program. Don't let that topple your understanding of how important that program is and how great that program is. There's a lot of veterans and their spouses out there. In fact, a third of the population who is elderly in this country is a veteran or spouse of a veteran statistically. So there's a lot of people out there that could qualify for that program if they meet the basic requirements there and you know, are interested in doing that. So let's talk about the PCAFC program. This program requires a 70% disability rating for the veteran. This program is only for veterans. It's not for spouses of veterans, okay? It does require fairly extensive benefit application, kind of like aid and attendance, and can take months to get approved. You can usually get around $2,500 a month once you're approved, and approval rates do vary, like aid and attendance. Why some people like this program, okay, is because they can get a family member approved to be the caregiver. That's why it's called comprehensive assistance for family caregivers, because it is designed to pay a family caregiver, including a spouse, for this program. So if someone is 70% disability rated, you're not going to be interested in them from an aid and attendance perspective right there, because you know already that they're probably never going to want to give up that money, right? But you could help them learn a little bit about this program and say, hey, maybe this is something you might be interested in. Obviously, you wouldn't be getting any financial value out of this program because they would be going to the VA, they'd be applying for it. The family caregiver would be getting a check from the VA every month to provide the care, right? Maybe up to $2,500 a month. So you wouldn't be involved, but potentially where you could be involved is, let's say they need more care than that, or let's say the spouse is getting burnt out and can't do it. You can then be that additional staffing entity, right, to go in and provide additional care and to supplement what they have already got. You know, maybe they need a lot more care than $2,500 pays for, and they've got money to pay for it, right? So just because on its face, this program isn't really something a home care agency can work with, it doesn't mean that there aren't other avenues, is what I'm saying, that you could help with. And I'm just always about giving out information to people, because ultimately, if you are seen out there, it's my belief that if you're seen out there as an information resource, people will come to you, right? And you don't have to be making a dollar off of every conversation you have with people. It's about educating and helping them. And in my experience, those individuals get contacted by more people, and those just end up getting more sales through something, right? So I think the more you can know and the more you can educate, the more valuable you become to people in your community, right? Okay, I think that's pretty much it on PCAFC program. Let's talk about VDC program. This program is actually not in full swing across the nation yet, although our president recently came out and kind of restated what has already been kind of said, but basically he just said, hey, reminder, this program is going to be rolled out across the nation by the end of next year. So that was kind of a recent thing in the news that just came out. It always was supposed to be rolled out by the end of 2024, but that was kind of restated, which is good. But right now it's in about 87 of the 180 something VA hospitals across the nation. And this program is administered through the VA hospital. So like the PCAFC program, the VDC program, like I said, is administered through the VA hospital. So if you want to get anyone to have access to this program or these two programs, you would send them to their local VA hospital or just send them to a local VA clinic. They're a lot easier to work with than going to the hospital. Just like going to any clinic is easier than going to an ER at a hospital, right? Send them to the local clinic, VA clinic, and they will be able to access these programs. If they don't have a VA clinic. If they're not aware of a VA clinic, that usually means that they have not got VA healthcare. Okay. If they're a veteran, they can apply for VA healthcare. Okay. And that's something you can go online and apply for. And you can Google apply for VA healthcare. And it's actually quite a simple process to do that. You can send them a link to that. They can go and apply online. And it's actually very fast if you do it online. You can actually get approved within 5 to 10 days for VA healthcare. Once they're approved, they will designate their primary care facility, and they can find a local VA clinic in their area, and then they can go to that VA clinic and then talk to them about one of these programs. So it can actually go quite quickly if they don't even have VA healthcare at this point. The VDC program is basically what I would classify as a newer version of the PCAFC program. And I think this over time will probably, really overshadow the PCAFC program, in my humble opinion. But basically, it's a very similar thing that allows the veteran to hire basically their own caregivers, and they could include family members or anybody. Okay. And they will then get money that will go to those individuals. The money doesn't come to the veteran. The money actually goes in a payment to the approved caregiver that they end up hiring. It is a 20-step program application, which sounds daunting, I know, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. You can get through it. And they would work with, a VA social worker at one of their clinics to start the process and get through it. Hopefully that social worker understands the program and can help them do that. Some are more knowledgeable than others, obviously, but it requires a financial needs plan that gets approved, and they would then become the legal employer of these individuals, and the VA would help them get set up as that employer, and they would help them with getting liability and work comp insurance set up and a bunch of different things like that. So it does sound complicated, I know, but if someone really sees this as a long-term requirement, I would encourage someone to do this. If they're just looking for care for a couple of months before mom goes to assisted living, or sorry, this wouldn't be, it could be a female veteran, but because this is for veterans only, or for dad, then I wouldn't recommend going for something like this at all, right? Because you can't take this to assisted living. They would bounce out of this if they're going to assisted living. If they're going to independent living, that would still allow them to use it, because independent living doesn't have capability to provide ADL assistance, right? But if they're kind of weeks or a few months away from making a transition from home to a assisted living or nursing home or something like that, this would not be the program for them. And the same with PCAFC as well. Those are designed to be provided in the home or independent living. So that's the kind of the basics of the VDC program. It is getting more publicity now. And as I mentioned already, President Biden recently came out and expanded it to all of the 170, we'll be expanding it to all the 172 VA centers by the end of next year. Right now, there are some areas that don't have this program locked in. Doesn't mean they can't get the program, though. They would just have to basically have their care assigned to a VA hospital that has the program, and that could be a long way away. So they would need to drive out to that hospital, and get count at least one visit a year in. To maintain that program. So it is possible to use it. If your local VA hospital doesn't, there might be one in a neighboring state or area that might offer it. So anyway, that's the VDC program, or Veteran Directed Care Program. If anyone's asking you about PCAFC or VDC, that's the basic summary of those programs.
Great. And I know we have a lot of questions coming through today, so I will end with a few takeaways that we want you all to walk away with. First off, we hope that you walk away from today's presentation with a better understanding of the options that are available to veterans when it comes to home care, and that you can speak the language in order to build that rapport with your local veteran service centers and potential clients. And by understanding these options, we hope that you better advocate for veterans to have access to the best care possible for their needs. And finally, if you encounter veterans who may need help accessing these programs, especially the Aide and Attendance program, they can be directed to companies such as Care Planning Institute that can assist in that application process. Now, I'd love to dive into the questions. I think we have several questions coming through. So I think in order to make the most of our time, I will try to group them into the different programs so that we can address this. But one question that we received in many different variations is, will this recording and will the slides be distributed? And the answer is yes. We are recording today, and we'll send both the recording and the slides out to everyone who registered. So if you're here, you will receive those. We will also place those links on partners.caring.com, so you'll be able to access them there as well. Now, Mark, one set of questions that we've received is actually about a program that we didn't speak to. So I'd love for you to touch on the Homemaker Home Health Aide program. And is there a particular reason we left that out of today's discussion?
Sure, it's a good question. We considered adding that in the discussion, but kind of left it out mainly because as far as home care agencies go, that depending on where you live is already a closed program. So if you're involved in that already, you already know about that program, obviously, because you're involved in it. If you're not involved in it, it's very difficult to access that program now, unfortunately. The program is managed by two organizations named Optum and TriWest. If you live in Texas and west of Texas, outside of like Nebraska and those states up in the Midwest, you will be under the TriWest umbrella. They are technically still taking new home care agencies. Okay, so there's a technical ability to get added into that network for that program in your area. However, we have heard that it takes a long time. And I think it's really all dependent on how many other home care agencies they already have in their network in your particular area. If for some reason they're low, they might push that along quicker. If they're not, you kind of get thrown to the back of the stack. And I've heard of people waiting over a year and no response after applying. So I didn't really want to put that program out there and then have everybody kind of go and apply and say, well, this led to, a rabbit hole and we didn't get anywhere with it, right? But the program, it is basically it's out there. If you're under the Optum states, which is Midwest and east of Texas, unfortunately, Optum has closed off access to that program. For those of you already in the program, you know that it's a pretty decent program. You basically are a contracted provider with the VA, and the VA can send you veterans, because it's for veterans only, veterans who need help with ADLs. And the VA has rates that they pay the home care agency, which are usually pretty decent in most states, and they will then pay for the care of these veterans that they refer to you. So if you make a good splash with marketing to these VA hospitals and clinics, which is not easy because it's not easy to access those facilities, especially after COVID. They're usually quite resistant to people showing up in at these places, depending on where you are, and doing some face-to-face marketing. So you kind of have to use some other means there. But for those of you who are in the programs, in that program, it can be good. The usual hours are usually about 10 hours a week that you will get, the veterans get awarded. It's not a ton of hours, but it is something. And so that's really the basics of that program. And then you would bill the VA. You have to get set up for billing and all of that. It's definitely a lot easier than it used to be 3 years ago, before Optum and TriWest took it over on the billing side of things. We used to hear of agencies not getting paid for 6 months and agencies going out of business because they never got paid by the VA. Those days are gone. Optum and TriWest are definitely a lot better with that, but it's still a fairly complicated thing. You've got to go through some systems and different things in order to get paid, kind of like working with any insurance type of deal. But if you do everything right, you do get paid. So, and paid pretty quickly if you're doing everything right. So just some kind of little bit of information there about that program.
Great, Mark. Thanks for sharing that. Now, we do have a few questions regarding aid and attendance. You mentioned there are financial and asset limits for aid and attendance benefits. Now, do you have those offhand, what specifically the financial and asset limitations are?
I mean, the assets, there is an actual limit. It's around 150,000. So that's basically what we call liquid assets, which would be money in bank accounts, 401k, stocks, bonds, that type of thing, right? It doesn't include the home they live in. It doesn't include cars or property that they own and that type of thing, right? As long as they're still living in that home. So the asset limits are definitely a lot higher than Medicaid. As I kind of mentioned, there was a difference there in the assets and income requirement. Medicaid is typically usually around $2,000 to $3,000 for a single person as far as their asset limits. In California, that recently changed. They recently upped that to be basically the same as the VA aid and attendance program. So in California, out here, we just made that change, which is great for Medicaid beneficiaries. As far as income goes, I don't like to necessarily throw any hard limits out there because there technically are no limits, because it all depends on how much care they are willing to pay for, right? If they've got $5,000 in income and they are spending $5,000 on care every month, the VA will now see their income as zero, and they will qualify for the full benefit because they have zero income. If they're making $5,000 in income and they are spending $3,000 on care, that means they've got $2,000 basically in income as far as the VA, qualified income as far as the VA is concerned. As a single veteran, that person would only get about $200 a month, because it's the difference between what the benefit for a single veteran is and what their qualifiable income is, which would be, in that case, the difference between like $2,200 and $2,000, which is $200 a month, right? So they would only qualify for $200 a month unless they started spending an additional $2,000 on care to get their income down to zero, right? So it just depends on what their income is and how much care they're getting. If someone comes to you and says, I don't want to spend any money on care out of my own pocket, I only want you to get me the money that I can get from the VA. If that's the case, and they're not willing to spend a penny out of their own pocket, then the guideline would be that they can't have more income than what the benefit amount is for that individual situation. So as a single veteran, they would get $2,150 or whatever it is now a month. So their income technically couldn't be higher than $2,150, right? Otherwise, they're not going to get any benefit. And so, and it's surviving spouse, $1,300 a month they can get. If they have more than $1,300 income, they're not going to get any money. But basically, if they're spending money on care, they're spending their income on care, then the VA will reimburse them that money up to the maximum benefit amount. So if you've got a surviving spouse, they're only going to get $1,300 a month, no matter what they're spending on care, right? Single veterans like $2,100, $2,200, and a couples are like $2,600, whatever it is now. So those are the maximum benefit amounts, and depending on what their income is, will depend on how much money they have to spend on care to get their income down to zero, so they qualify for the full benefit. I know that's a lot of information right there. It's probably confusing, but that's kind of how it works.
Very helpful, very helpful. And another question we received regarding AA is, can the veteran's spouse receive benefits even if that veteran is rated over 50% disabled?
The benefit for the spouse goes on the service of the veteran. So they wouldn't be able to do that. That spouse is getting a benefit based on the service of that veteran. If that veteran is already getting a disability, they would not be able to get that for their spouse, because it goes on them, not the spouse. So.
Got it. Now, for this benefit, does the agency have to be like VA approved in any way? Or is it just up to the client to pick who they want to provide the care?
For which program was that?
I believe this is about aid and attendance. So they're receiving that reimbursement, but does the agency itself have to be VA approved?
They don't. No, the only program you have to be VA approved is that VA home care aid program that is not available in a lot of areas. The aid and attendance, you don't have to have any VA approval. It's just like providing care to a private paying customer, except they're getting money coming from the VA to their bank account, and they can use that money to pay you guys for their care. So.
Got it. And so just to reiterate that, because we have another question related. So if approved for A&A, do the funds have to be used for caregiving services? And then do they submit invoices to be reimbursed? How does that work?
So if you went to a VA service officer and asked them, hey, with this VA aid and attendance pension benefit, does it have to be spent on care? They would have heard the word pension in that sentence, and they will say, no, a pension doesn't have to be spent on care. You can spend it on whatever you want. And technically that is a true statement, okay, if you have very low or little income, okay? So a pension, like I said earlier, you could get approved for maybe a few $100s a month of this pension without spending any money on care. If, let's say, you're a single veteran, okay, and you have $1,500 in income, the maximum benefit for single veterans is $2,200. So I could help someone apply for that program. They would get $700 a month, and they don't have to spend that money on care. So that VSO officer is basically speaking to that type of individual, right? When they give the answer to that question. And this is sometimes what ties people up in knots and ends up ending poorly for them. And they end up owing all the money back that they've got from the VA because they get told an answer like that when they're a person who has $2,200 in income. And they have to, and they're getting $2,200 from the VA now because they were spending $2,200 on care. If they stop spending that $2,200 on care, their income goes back to $2,200. They qualify for zero benefit. Any overpayment made, the VA will come back and get that money, and they're actually garnishing other government payments to get that money back. So it's a very serious deal when working with that program. You wouldn't want someone to have other government program funds that they're getting garnished because they didn't do it right. And that's the hard part for me for that program, because I know that people go to the VA trusting that they're going to get the right answers, and basically they get an answer without a set of questions that need to come before that answer in order to give the right answer, right? They just say, no, you don't have to spend a pension on care, which is a true statement for the one that has very low income. But usually they don't find out what their income is and what their situation is, right? So in answer to the question, it depends. It all depends. But usually people are pretty much up to that income limit and they need to spend money on care. Otherwise, they're only going to get a few $100s a month, right? If you want the whole benefit amount, you absolutely have to be spending money on care, right? Because you can't get down to zero without spending money on care. There's no other qualifiable expense except spending money on care. You know, some people talk about pharmacy expenses and other things like that. They don't count. The VA wants predictable expenses for the foreseeable 12 months. And pharmacy expenses go up and down depending on what your situation is, and the VA knows that. So a home care expense is a qualifiable monthly expected expense, and so that does get approved. But again, it does all depend on what their situation is. If they just want $700 and that's all they're going to spend on care or whatever, then they can spend that on care or not spend that on care, right? If they've got $1,500 in income. But if they want $2,200 worth of money to spend on care, we've got to get their income down to zero. And for that, we've got to spend money on care and keep spending money on care to keep their income every month going down to zero.
Got it. Yeah. And so another question we received is related to disability ratings. Does it have to be associated with their military service, or can it be related to activities outside of the military? I guess how they came to be disabled.
Typically, the VA is not going to issue a VA disability in my understanding of this, unless it can be tick and tied back to something that happened while they were serving in the military. If they just started smoking and now they've got emphysema or something like that, or COPD, because of the smoking, that's not going to be something they're going to give them a VA disability rating for. But if they, like I said, can trace it back to this person served in Vietnam and inhaled Agent Orange, if that's what's going on with his lungs right now, that's why he's got these issues, that will be something they would be willing to give a VA disability on.
Makes sense. Now, can a veteran be approved for both A and PCAFC at the same time?
That is technically possible. Technically, I would recommend going for PCAFC first and then going for aid and attendance, because the PCAFC people are probably going to ask, do you have any other things? And they might block them from that versus going the other way where it's already approved and what are they going to do now, type of thing. But usually these are done separately. One that they can have for sure is they can have aid and attendance and that home care aid program that's basically off limits to new agencies, right? That I do know, that people have successfully done that, where they go and get that one and they get aid and attendance on top of that. So if you have clients that you're servicing with that home care aid program, depending on the VA medical center, because they're all different, they might not have a problem with that person getting additional care. But then some of these VA medical centers might say, oh, you're getting care through another program. Oh, we're going to cut back your hours then. Instead of 15 hours a week, we're going to cut you back to 4 a week. Right. So sometimes it can kind of backfire. But what I've seen is that these VA medical centers, not any of them are created the same. They are all, it's a real cottage industry. And they all have their own little rules about what they want, this, that, and the other with these programs. And you kind of just have to navigate what's okay for them and what's not okay for them. So.
And another question that we have, and I think it's kind of tied to a lot of the answers, it seems like, are it depends. And it's all about kind of knowing the process and the steps to kind of help guide people through. Now, if the need for care is there and they kind of hit all of these qualifications, are all veterans approved for these programs? Or are there other kind of varying reasons why someone might not be approved?
I mean, I've given the basic kind of main blockers, could you say, of why people will not qualify. There are intricate details on certain things, but those are kind of rare, not the norm, if you will. I'd say we've covered 90% of what's going to block people from these programs. We had one veteran who served in boot camp, and it turned out that the boot camp didn't actually count as technical active duty. And the war ended while he was in boot camp. And so even though he had a military discharge that said active duty, the VA actually bounced that one. And so there's sometimes some weird technicalities like that, but that's not the norm. If they're compliant with these basic requirements, usually that's hitting 90 to 95% of it. That we've talked about. The other one for surviving spouses that I didn't mention, which can be a big issue, is if they're a surviving spouse of a veteran and they were divorced from that veteran before the veteran passed, that they're not getting anything, that surviving spouse. They have to have been married to them. They could have been, not living in the same house. Okay. Maybe they want, one was in a trailer home next to the house or whatever, right? The other one was in the house. Technically separated, but they can't be legally divorced because the VA won't give the surviving spouse anything with that. So.
Got it. And now we have a question regarding we have a lot of questions that hopefully we'll get to as many as possible, but I will say we will try to follow up offline if there are any specific ones that we can't touch on. So one question that we received, and I believe this is regarding the VDC and, programs where you are employing a family member or someone else. Does that mean that the VA helps the veteran pay for things like worker comp and liability insurance, or are things like that necessary in that situation?
So the VDC program, it does require them to be the official employer. And the reason they do that is because it is technically, an employee, right? That's how they're kind of classifying it. And so they do require them to have, work comp and pay the taxes and all of that. And they do have a third-party financial company that manages that. So they will actually get that going and help them get that set up, right? And spin that up with them. And so a family member or someone helping direct all of this process is usually not the elderly veteran, right? It's usually a family member, son or daughter, whatever, can help with those pieces. And they'll work with that financial management company who's going to be cutting the actual checks or sending that money direct to bank accounts of those caregivers once they're approved and set up. That's a piece that financial management company plays. There's basically, a handful of partnerships that are happening in that VDC program, and all of them work together, and they help you through the process. It's not an impossible process to go after. It's just that, it does take time, and some people don't really want to spend that amount of time or effort doing it. What we see is actually a lot of younger veterans who lost an arm or leg or something like that, going after that VDC program, because they're going to be needing that program for potentially decades, right? So it's worth it to them to go after that. So there's definitely downsides to all of these programs and upsides. I just mainly want to make you guys aware of what these acronyms need. So if you're talking to a VSO officer, or somebody or at a Veterans of Foreign War office or American Legion office, you go to one of those places, you knock on their door and ask to speak to the commander of that VFW or American Legion and say, hey, we know a thing or two about working with veterans and certain programs. I'd love to come and give you guys, a little kind of bit of information about some of these programs that might be helpful, right? And we could do a little presentation like this for them, right? And give them some basic information. So it might not always be something that you would be interested in working with, obviously, but you could at least direct them to get more information from their VA clinic or whatever ultimately would be a good source of information for them. So
great. And I know we have a lot of questions. We've already touched on a lot of questions, and there are more coming through, but a lot of questions that we're receiving, I'm trying to sum them up into kind of one topic, and they seem to be revolving around, how do I help provide more care for veterans? So whether that is, how do I get in touch with more veterans, to promote their agency and the work they do, or veterans that come across, their agency, what's the best way to kind of point them in the right direction? So just, Mark, we spoke about this a little bit leading up to it, whether it's collaborating with their local VA or things like that. What's your recommendation to those questions around, how do I help more veterans?
One thing I've noticed in the VA world is that they're very skittish of companies that propose to help people get quote pension benefits. So it's kind of like walking into an airport and talking about your gun collection as you're going through security. Probably not the right time to be talking about that, right? Let's just wait till you get through the scanners and get on the other side, right? It's kind of like that if you go to a VA person, at a VA clinic or something. If you walk in there and say, "Oh, we can help veterans help them get their benefits," that might come across a little bit raw, because they've seen what we call these senior poachers out there who, kind of steal benefits from people, right? From elderly people, and the VA is well aware of that. So there's these folks out there that have given kind of everything a bad name. So you just have to be careful how you say it, how you talk about it. I wouldn't really talk about pension benefits. I would just talk about, programs that can help veterans pay for home care, and kind of word it that way. I think sometimes it might be 3 degrees off, but that 3 degrees is going to lead you in a very different trajectory over a consistent period of time, right? So I think not using pension benefits necessarily, at least starting out, when you're having that initial conversation, you don't want to put a wall up when you're just trying to maybe book a meeting or something, right? But in places to go, I mean, 1 in 3 elderly people are veterans or spouses of veterans. They're all over the place. They're everywhere. They're, going to senior centers. They're going to, any clinics in your local area. I mean, they're going, veterans go to VFWs, Veteran of Foreign War offices, American Legion offices. I mean, just anywhere where, elderly people will be kind of congregating, there's going to be statistically 3 out of 10 that are a veteran or spouse of a veteran, right? So I think it's just going to these places and letting them know, hey, look, there's funds out there. And very few people even know that these funds are available, let alone have a fighting chance when they go and apply for them, right? And say, we've got resources and partnerships and different things that we work with that can help people find out about these programs, and then also have a fighting chance of getting approved when they apply, right? It's like representing yourself in court without an attorney. You can do that, but do you want to, right? Probably not, right? So I think, marketing wise, it's just opening your mouth and getting out there and telling everyone that you can help veterans and their spouses get funds to pay for their care. There's various programs out there, and not using words like pension benefits that might kick off a red flag or something in especially the VA's minds. I don't think you need to worry about that talking to non-VA people, but, walking into anything to do with the VA, a Veteran Service Office, or those types of things, I think sometimes they're very wary. And sometimes those Veteran Service Officers actually do aid and attendance applications as well. So they might see you as a little bit of competition. So you kind of have to say, well, look, if there are people that you can't work with or whatever reason don't qualify, send them to us. We might be able to help them with some other program or whatever. We're knowledgeable on a few things, So I think it's just getting out there and just always, telling people that you're a resource for helping veterans pay for home care.
Great. Now, we do have other questions that have come through, but just given the time that we have dedicated for today, we're going to take those offline. But thank you, everyone, for being so engaged with our Q&A today. It was great to have all of these questions come through. And once again, we will be distributing both the recording and the slides out. So keep a lookout in your inbox for those later this week.
Thanks,
oh, yes, thank you so much. And just to conclude today, if you have any further questions, please do reach out to Caring. You can reach out at sales_homecare@caring.com specifically to get in touch with our home care team, or call the number listed here. Now, as you close out of this webinar, there will be a survey that pops up. And that's where you can let us know what you thought about today, what topics that you'd like to hear from in the future. We would love to hear your feedback. So please take the time to submit that. And of course, to stay on top of upcoming trainings, I encourage you to go to partners.caring.com, where we will also be posting that recording and slides from today. So with that, we'll let you all get back to the commendable work of helping seniors. And we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.